walk in some of London's great hotels, you look around, don't you, and think of the history, that sort of thing. And you kind of think, well, how many people have walked through those doors, and the rich, the famous? And this is really the case in point today at the beautiful Café Royal Hotel, which is, of course, just at the bottom end of Regent Street, or the top end, depending on which way round you look upon it. But there's one thing that really stands out in this hotel. It's not the glitz, the glamour, the steeped in history or any of that, but this particular initial. The initial N. Yeah, something I can, of course, very much like myself. There's a big history behind how the N suddenly became everywhere. And literally, not is it only in stained glass, but it's on the floors, it's on lamps, and the real sort of story behind exactly who insisted upon it. And then once it was inserted, how it sort of all fell apart. The Café Royal is an incredible place, let me tell you. Many, many years ago, while I was a struggling thespian, I came here to work on a number of occasions as a freelance person. And you just get the elegance of it, what it must have been like, say, for instance, with Oscar Wilde holding court, or, you know, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who also was a frequent visitor here. In the latter part, of course, the big names that we now know are the beautiful and late Princess Diana, who was also something of a regular, the Duchess of York, the Queen Mother. Everybody went through those doors. And what's fascinating when you dig a little bit deeper, as I say, is behind all of these colossal, huge hotels, which were at the cusp of the late Victorian era and the Edwardian era, there's always a battle. And guess what, chums? It always involves money, right? In 1865, Daniel Nicholls actually was on the run from the Napoleonic, dare I say, police. And that's what they called it anyway. And the bottom line was he arrived in London, not particularly well off, but determined, of course, to make his fortune. But the problem wasn't really sort of making his fortune, because obviously he was hidden away. He spent 10 years on the run. And then when he got his break with the brilliant Café Royal, he decided, well, things really had to step up a bit. He was nervous, of course, about being caught. But his daughter was the fatal mistake in all of this. You see, what was interesting, she went on to marry not a rather too rich lace maker called George. And George very slowly wheedled his way into the Café Royal, suddenly becoming the head of kitchens and offering all sorts of pieces of advice about how the hotel should be run. More importantly, just as the finishing touches were about to be put into place, George suggested that absolutely that he was the founder, Daniel Nicholls. Well, he should have his name everywhere so people would know from the moment you walked into that beautiful stained glass window that you're looking at now. And where that's interesting is you think, oh great, you know, playing to their ego. Daniel loved it. Napoleonic complex, you might say. Suddenly, it wasn't just on the glass or indeed on the floor. It was on lampshades and lampstands, everything. However, George was no fan of Daniel, and he didn't particularly like the way that he'd been treated by him. So as a sort of stab in the back, shall we say, he decided to insert a Napoleonic crest, which by the time Daniel came to see it was already embedded in everything. It was simply too late to change it. So suddenly, well, he had to live with it, but he never truly liked it, even though, of course, he originally liked the idea. You see what these things are like. Even back then, people were difficult to work with. The Café Royal also has a rather gruesome murder story. Yet again, in the 1800s, a French night porter was finishing his shift. He was taking a seat in the beautiful dining room where the chef had prepared his late night meal, sitting there just after 1 a.m. in the morning, and suddenly, without any word of warning, somebody came in and shot him twice, clean dead. Yes, and apparently he still haunts the place. But not only that, this is where you think nothing's truly changed. Nobody ever found the culprit who shot Mr. Martin. So the story goes that if you're there late at night and you hear some sort of rumblings from a night porter, it might not be the official night porter on duty. In fact, it could be Mr. Martin. All of these wonderful treasures are to be discovered just by simply walking through a door of an historic hotel. I'm sure you'll agree. As ever, thank you so much for joining me on a short canter of history about the beautiful Café Royal. And as I said, you know, it's a wonderful place. I'm not an ambassador. I'm not being paid. There's nothing in it for me. Sometimes between you and I just come into these places and sit around and marvel at what's gone on before. And obviously, if you've worked in a place, you like to see what it looks like now. They've absolutely refurbished it. And you think, yeah, this is a lot grander than it was. But really the history remains. And it would be a shame, wouldn't it, if all of these sort of big hotels couldn't suffice. Seemingly though, this is doing incredibly well, even at these prices. But again, it's always nice to share that particular element of history with you. Now as ever, chums, if you could, please like, share and comment respectfully. And let me know what you think to the story of the N in Café Royal. Neil Sean in the very heart of Regent Street, London.